Hey there, and welcome to the Coaching Floors podcast. This is Dr. Jen, and each week we'll be doing interviews to inform our listeners about techniques to help children with complex communication needs discover their voice with AAC. Stay tuned. I do want to give you a heads up that this week I tried a phone recording service for this interview, and the audio quality didn't turn out quite as I'd hoped it to. But the information Heather shares with us is outstanding.
When I was interviewing Alonda, she mentioned picture schedules, and I thought, who do I know that could help answer some questions about picture schedules versus picture communication tools? And I immediately thought of Heather Blevins-Freitag. So let's welcome Heather to the phone call today. Hey, Heather, how are you?
Great.
I have worked with Heather over the years on a number of cases, and I've come to respect her expertise in the field of autism. She has a lot to offer teams when consulting, and oftentimes strategies that work with autism are just good strategies that can help anyone. So I'm excited to have her on this interview today. So Heather, share with us some of your background and what propelled you into the field of education and consulting.
Oh my goodness. So I've been in the field of education for the past 28 years. That just blows my mind. I really don't remember ever wanting to be anything but a teacher. So when I graduated high school, I immediately went to the University of Northern Iowa, and I started my education there, getting a bachelor's degree in education with endorsements in special education and reading. And quickly realized I wanted to do more in the field of special education. So I went back for my master's and received my master's in special ed and also an endorsement in consulting. So I have taught both in the special education classroom and the general education classroom at the elementary level. But right now, my current position is with Keystone Area Education Agency as a special education consultant, and I serve on the Keystone Autism Resource Team.
Very cool. Why autism?
Well, that's funny too. I have always known people with autism, but I didn't know they had autism. And I love the saying, like, once you've met a person with autism, you've met a person with autism, because each are so unique and fascinating to me. I really started my autism training or teaching when I taught in the special education classroom. One of my speech-language pathologists that I worked with as a team member said, you really need to take this training. It's for kids with autism, but it just works with all kinds of kids, and it was the structured teach. So I took that and realized quickly that there are a lot more kids with autism that I knew than I didn't know.
I love that saying. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, even to this day, it's truly fascinating. I love to try to communicate with them and figure out how they think, and they have so much to give and teach me that I enjoy every minute with them. So, I know that's your question, but that's my passion.
Awesome. I love it. Can you describe for our listeners what picture schedules are and why someone would benefit from them?
Sure. Yeah, this is great. So picture schedules are, sometimes they would be called visual schedules, basically are visual representations of locations that a student will move to during the course of the school day. So you have to always remember that they're going to take you somewhere to a different location. And that's the big thing with a schedule. Versus any other kind of visual support. Benefits, they help establish routines. So it helps the child understand that first this happens and then this happens. It helps in aiding in transitions. So if a student doesn't understand or have knowledge of what you're wanting them to do next, you can place that picture or visual in front of them to get them to their next location and help aid with that transition. It really helps teach discrete events. You know, math happens and reading happens, and it really promotes independence. So it takes away an adult telling them where to go or what to do once they get there. So anyway, it takes and promotes that independence, takes away that adult support.
As you were talking, I thought of a student that we've worked with before, didn't have autism, but struggled with transitioning from activity to activity and place to place between the gen ed classroom and the special ed classroom. And this kind of gets into the next question, where are the different types of schedules, but you helped us implement like an object schedule. It was amazing. Within a week, that kiddo was able to move about the building pretty easily on his own. And when before he wasn't wanting to move at all or was struggling to transition from activity to activity. So that really increases independence and cut down on that transition time too. So what are the different types of schedules that are out there?
Yeah, so before I even get to the differences, I think there's a couple things that you have to keep in mind when you are trying to figure out a type of schedule. So first of all, you have to really think of the cognitive level of the child that you're working with and how you can make a schedule functional in their current environment. And sometimes socially acceptable too. So keeping those things in mind, you have to decide if a schedule is going to be stationary or mobile with the student. So it doesn't make sense to have the schedule in, say, the room where the student receives special education instruction, or does it make it more sense for the schedule to go with them to places? And then you have to decide what kind of schedule it's going to be. Is it going to be full day? Is it going to be partial day? Is it going to be first, then next, or first, then? And I think with the little guy you're talking about, we might have just had like a now schedule because he just needed to know what was happening now. So you really have to think of those things too. With the full day, sometimes when a student sees all of that, that sometimes causes anxiety and they want the day to end. So they're looking at what happens at the end of the day instead of what they're supposed to be doing next. So you have to keep in mind some of those behaviors that you may need to be addressing through presenting the schedule that way. Yeah, pulling that bus at 9:05 is not going to be doable.
I love it. Some kids need to see the whole day so that they can see it going away, too.
Definitely.
Like you said, it depends on the cognitive level.
Definitely. And that gets to, do they need to take an icon or a visual off and put it in a done? Or can they cross it off? Or are they okay with having it always there and just knowing what's going to happen next? So you really need to kind of trial some things out with a student or understand their cognitive level. And that kind of goes in deciding what type.
So what are some different types?
Yeah, there's really no hierarchy of these. Like, any of these can be used with any age student, and you don't have to start with one to get to the next one. So I'll just tell you the different types. You mentioned the object one, and this one just uses functional objects to represent locations, and they can be used by the student when transitioning to those locations. I think we incorporated like a plastic spoon to represent lunchroom. So he knew that that spoon would take him to the lunchroom, and that's where he would have lunch or eat. There's other ones that you could use, such as just a tissue paper for bathroom. They don't always have to be specific to that, but they have to be consistent. So if you're always going to use an eraser to represent art, then it always needs to be an eraser. Another type would be photographs. So these are actual photographs of the locations where the student would need to go. So you go take a picture of the table where reading instruction takes place, or you go take a picture of the teacher whose classroom he needs or she needs to transition into. Then you have probably the more popular ones, line drawing or picture drawing, and that's the 2D drawings that are used to represent locations. And they can be black and white or they can be in color. And I think probably one of the more popular tools to make these is the program Boardmaker. And there's also an app called ChoiceWorks that you can download that have line drawing representations right on a device. So like on an iPad or a portable device of some kind. So that's probably the more popular, and that's usually what you typically start with and see how a student responds, and then you might have to change it depending on their success with it or not. Some students are able to just have a written schedule. So just writing words or brief statements, naming locations that they would be going to. Mrs. Smith's classroom or lunchroom or whatever your language is with them. Or you can have a combination of any of the above, especially when you're trying to transition them from one type of schedule to another. So maybe you're trying to get them away from object and you want to start introducing line drawing at the same time.
Good to think about.
Yeah, lots to think about.
Yes, lots to think about. I don't know if you've experienced this, and this kind of goes along with that interview with Alonda and my thought of you, but sometimes I've noticed in my coaching that people get mixed up between picture schedules and pictures as communication tools. Why do you think that is, and how can we help address that?
Yes, this is like one of the biggest things as a consultant I see. So they get confused and start to use the children's communication device as a schedule. And we have to remember that that device is their voice. Putting in pictures to communicate with, to express wants and needs, that gives them their voice. When you put a visual schedule in place, that tells them where to go or what location they need to be at. It's really important, I think, that you keep those two separate as much as possible. So if they do have a device used for communication, have their schedule be something different. So they understand the two separate things. And then adults working with them understand that it's two separate things too.
I think what you really helped say, too, is the schedule is a location. And so if we're using their communication device as their schedule, they're not going to understand that I want you to go somewhere or you need to be somewhere next.
Exactly. So they're going to start requesting PE or requesting to go to have snack, and it's not going to be time for that in their day. So a schedule, when you're giving them a visual representation of where to go for location, that's telling them it's time for that activity in that specific place or that location. So snack, or go to Miss Smith's room and then snack. So those two things are telling you where to go, and then there might be a snack table. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think one other thing to think about, too, is to keep them separate so that when a child is told it's time for, let's say something that they don't like. A lot of children oftentimes don't like music classic. So if we tell them, if their schedule says time for location, here, here's your music class, then their communication tool could say, have options on it to say, no, I don't want to.
No, thank you.
So, no thanks. Or they could ask now, or who am I going with, or where am I going? So we have to have their communication device open and ready to have communication about that next location or where they're going.
Exactly, yes. I think some of and this is just a whole nother topic, sometimes we don't teach what the visuals mean either when you have them just on a ring, and where the assumption is that a child knows it because it's in visual representation, and that might not be true. So we might not be eliciting the behavior we want from those cards and thinking that they're not listening, but they might not be even understanding what we're asking. So it's important to teach what each one of those cards mean. Again, good for when you want to take the adult out of the equation, but they have to know what you're asking them to do.
Absolutely. Very good. I love it. Okay, so back on topic here.
I know. I'm so sorry.
I love learning and I love picking people's brains, so I keep, putting in my own questions. So, anyhow, sometimes children with autism struggle with communication. What communication systems, tools, or strategies do you recommend teams look into to support children's language acquisition?
Oh, my. So, first of all, I love that you use the word teams there, because I think it's really important that everybody be on the same page when something is decided for a student. I think probably one of the most popular, and one of the first ones that always comes into discussion is the Picture Exchange Communication System, or PECS. And that is actually one of the 27 evidence-based practices promoted for children with autism. So there's a lot of modules out there on how to implement PECS, and there's training. But I know there's 6 steps to it. And the first is kind of going through a flow chart and really understanding if a child is ready for PECS or not. So a lot of information out there on PECS, but that's probably one of the very first tools we start to talk about. And probably when, with a certified speech language pathologist, we will start to explore with the child right away. A lot of the devices promote that exchange of symbols for communication. So I think a lot of that, the philosophy of PECS is embedded in some of the other communication tools and strategies that are out there.
Mm-hmm. It helps the children learn that communication happens between 2 or more people, to have that exchanging of the pictures. If I want something, I have to initiate with someone to then get something.
Exactly. Stop, put it in an open hand, or get the person's attention and point to it, instead of getting some of these, like, I like to call them fly-by talkers, where they just don't engage the listener, and they're just doing off stuff, and you're not really sure who they're talking to. Like the kid that sits at the table, I want a blue crayon. I want a blue crayon. I want a blue crayon. Well, who are you talking to, buddy? So giving that opportunity to have an icon of a blue crayon and putting it in someone's hand or pointing to it. So. Yeah.
To me, being able to express wants and needs are not enough. What about when they have that skill and thinking about living out their best life with family and friends? Communication plays a big role. Being able to tell stories, jokes, understand idioms. How have you seen language supported in children who are maybe higher functioning?
So visuals can do all of that too. It's just amazing. All of those skills can be taught with visuals. So you can use sentence structures as socially appropriate responses, visual cue cards for jokes. I had a wonderful speech language pathologist that taught idioms through watching cartoons. And taught them slang. Like when you get to the middle school and high school level and you think of some of the slang and keeping up with all the current slang, making sure that they understand that children understand that, and are taught what it means. Like, they might not know what that means. I always think of the person that, LOL, thinking it means lots of love instead of laugh out loud, and adding that to the email about someone's death or something, So teaching them all of that through visuals is really good. There's so many idioms and just current language in some of the cartoons. It's kind of cool to sit back and watch some of that with kids and stop and pause and teach them what's going on.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned cartoons because it kind of goes right into my next question. But children also may struggle with echolalic behavior or TV talk. How do you help address this?
Oh, yeah, this is a fun one. Echolalic or TV talk is really just repetition of a phrase or statement, sometimes from a favorite TV show. Sometimes you figure out once you meet the caregivers where it comes from, because that caregiver may use that phrase or statement a lot. I had a little guy that could, repeat a whole episode of his favorite cartoon from start to finish.
Oh, my goodness.
But it didn't serve a purpose. There was no purpose for it that we could find. So really, I think you need to figure out, does that phrase or statement have a function or a purpose? And how does it interfere with their communication? Sometimes students use it really appropriately. So they might have picked up a phrase, like, oh no, and they can use it really appropriately. But it's not something that they may have put together themselves. And you figure out it comes from SpongeBob or Paw Patrol or something like that. So I think students that aren't able to put together their own words, or they don't have enough of that core vocabulary to do that, might pick up on some of them. Sometimes it might be self-soothing in a calming sense, that's something that gives them pleasure or takes them to to a place that's more preferable, so they might use some of that repetition for some of that. So you really have to figure out the function of it and how does it interfere. Is it necessary to get rid of behavior, or can you replace it with something more appropriate? So there's some functional communication training that's also an evidence-based practice that looks at the function of the language and if it needs to be replaced or not.
Well, thank you for sharing with us today. I have one final question for you. If you could leave our listeners with one thought or strategy to implement immediately that would help a child discover their voice with AAC, what would it be?
I have thought really hard about this when I reviewed this question, and I really kind of go back to be patient. So we as educators want to put words into a student's mouth or guess what they want because we want to provide them with something immediately. I really think you have to teach yourself to give them time to respond. I've gotten to a point where I've kind of trained myself to count 30 seconds before I restate anything or present anything. Just because children learning need that time to, process what you've asked them or process what they want to ask. And if you restate something too soon, you're going to start that process over. Mm-hmm. So you're interrupting their thinking process. So I think patience is one of the biggest ones.
I love it.
So it's just wait.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Oh, no problem. I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
You bet.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. If you could, subscribe to the podcast so you get notified when new episodes are released, and check out Coaching Flores on Facebook and coachingflores.com for downloads. I hope you heard something that inspires you. I'll see you next week.